A very good morning to all of you. After having discussed Romanticism, its main features and major contributors, now we shall go ahead with our lecture on the life and works of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or who is well known as S.T. Coleridge. In brief, we shall understand him. So you can see the image of Coleridge here. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge was born on October 21, 1722 in a place named Devonshire, which is a part of England. And while talking about the Romantic poets, I'd mentioned that he was a very close friend, to poet William Wordsworth. He was a founder of the English Romantic movement, as we know it very well. Along with Wordsworth, they published the work, the lyrical ballads, and there is the beginning of Romantic movement, official beginning of Romantic movement in England. But I have told you earlier that they didn't call themselves Romanticists. Historians named them as Romanticists. Means they came up with particular ideas, we can see. And they started it as a reaction against the earlier school of writing. So Coleridge was, as I mentioned, an English Romantic poet and critic. And he's well known for these particular works. The first important work which is associated with S.T. Coleridge is the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It was published in the year 1798 in Lyrical Ballads. Then, second important work, it is not the full work. It is a poetry in fragment. And I'm pretty sure that you have studied this poem in your SYBA, Kubla Khan, which was published in the year 1816. In the same year, he had also published his famous poem, Christabel. And apart from these three great works, of course, there are many other works, just I'm mentioning some of the important works. He is well known for his critical work, Biographia Literaria, which was published in the year 1817. So this is his critical work. Now let's try to understand something about his childhood. He was the 10th and last child of the Vicar of Ottery, St. Mary, near Devonshire, England. And we already come to know that he was born on 21st October 1772. His father was associated with the church. After his father's death in the year 1782, he was sent to Christ's Hospital for schooling. Now, when we talk about his childhood, he had an amazing memory. As a child, he remembered everything. He had an amazing memory and an eagerness to learn. If you have studied his Kubla Khan, you remember that Kubla Khan is a dream work, a vision. He had seen a dream. And he wrote this poem by remembering his dream. So that can help you understand how amazing memory power he had. And further, he had an eagerness to learn. This is required, a required quality for a good student. If at all you want to succeed in your life, you should have this quality, eagerness to learn. He described his next 3 years of school as depressed, moping, friendless. Means after he joined the school, he felt very depressed. He had a very sad kind of life, and he didn't have friends during these days. In the year 1791, he entered Jesus College, Cambridge. And actually, his financial condition was not so good. He had debts. Because of bad debts, Coleridge joined the 5th Light Dragoons, which is a British cavalry unit. You know, cavalry means the army, which fights on horses. Gordar Mandavan. So he joined this cavalry unit in December 1793, and he left again in April 1794 and returned to Jesus College. But he could not complete his degree. So you can understand, he could not complete his education because actually the reason he left was because of his developing friendship with Robert Southey. I mentioned that he was one of the poets from the first generation of Romantic poets. So he developed friendship with Robert Southey. Robert Southey lived between 1774 to 1843, and they became very good friends. So both these young men were very interested in poetry, and they had a kind of dislike for neoclassical tradition, so the earlier school of writing. And by just in their thoughts, they were very radicals. In politics, they were radicals, not moderate. Sahalwadi hote the. They were highly inspired by the French Revolution, which took place in the year 1789. And from their conversation, which was emotional and idealistic, they developed a plan for a pantisocracy. A pantisocracy means a vision of an ideal community. It is a vision of an ideal community. And they had this plan to develop this ideal community in America. But this plan failed. It never came to be reality. On October 4th, 1795, Coleridge married Sarah Frecker. She was Southey's wife-to-be sister, the sister of Southey's wife-to-be. Miss, Southey was yet to marry this lady. So I'm talking about that lady's sister. To be wife to be, that is the proper term, or fiancé we can say. So by that time, their friendship ended. Means when he married Sarah Frecker, the friendship between Coleridge and Southey ended. So I mentioned that he met Robert Southey, and he was motivated by the heady political and intellectual atmosphere, which was highly inspired by the French Revolution. So I mentioned that together they propose a utopian community. Must be knowing Utopia, a very famous work by Sir Thomas More during 15th century, early 16th century I can say. Utopian community. Utopia is the work, just like Plato's Republic, wherein Thomas More had talked about an ideal state where there will be no violence, there will be no fighting, no conflict, no poverty. It will be ideal, everyone is happy. So both of them propose a utopian community, which was to be built on two principles. One is pantisocracy, means government by all, and asceticism, Aspectivism means meaning general ownership of the property. Of course, Marx was not there when Coleridge was there. Karl Marx had similar kind of notion. So both of them had this kind of idea. So they thought of government by all and no ownership of property. These are the two terms, aspectivism and pantisocracy. And in 1795, under the pressure from Saudi, okay, we came to know that he married South Africa, who was the sister of Saudi's wife, Edith. And their first son, Hartley, was born the following year. Okay, shortly afterwards, the Coleridge and Saudi abandoned this particular experiment, pantisocracy. Now, the second important phase in his life, in Coleridge's life, is his meeting with William Wordsworth. Okay, means Coleridge met William Wordsworth in the same year after he stopped, his friendship with Robert Southey, and the two spent much time discussing poetry, politics, and philosophy. And this rich personal and intellectual association between Coleridge and Southey brought out significant fruit. It was a very fruitful friendship because both of them decided to collaborate on a volume of poems which had a plan of bringing revolution in the practice of writing poetry. They wanted to revolutionize. To revolutionize means what? Revolution is a drastic change. They wanted to bring a drastic change in the practice of poetry, the way poetry was written in those days. And that volume, the collaborative volume, was named Lyrical Ballads, which was first published as a single volume in the year 1798. Then it was expanded and published in two volumes. And the second volume came up with the preface. You should remember that. Preface was written in the year 1800. Preface is an introduction. When Lyrical Ballads was published originally in the year 1798, Wordsworth had not written his preface. So he wrote the preface for the second volume, which was published in the year 1800. Now let's talk about his poetic career briefly. The years from 1795 to 1802 were for Coleridge a period of fast poetic and intellectual growth after he met William Wordsworth. So a good company matters a lot, you can see that. He got inspired because of the discussion between Wordsworth and Coleridge. So it was a very fruitful part of time of his life, we can say. A man is known by the company he keeps, and your company matters a lot. So because of a good company, he could become a very good poet. His talent came out. It was a period of his intellectual and poetic growth, we can say. And during this period, his first major poem came out, the Aeolian Harp, which was published in the year 1796 in his poems on various subjects. That was the title of his work. And this poem was very famous. And its verse and theme contributed to the growth of English Romanticism. It illustrated, showed how combination of emotional expression and description can be brought together with meditation. It showed how emotions can be expressed and how man can meditate on his internal thoughts. From March to May 1796, Coleridge edited The Watchman The Watchman was the periodical that failed after 10 issues. He could not continue. It was there from March to May only. He came up with 10 issues. Now you should remember, for Satan net examination, these kind of questions are asked. So you should take note of such minute things if at all you want to succeed in Satan net examination. So he failed. Actually, they may ask you, what is the name of the periodical published by T Coleridge? They won't ask you about the Rhyme of Ancient Mariner or the Biographia Literaria. Okay, so these are the things that you should understand while reading history. So this failure made him realize that he was not fit for public life. So he wrote the next poem, Ode to the Departing Year, shows that he had still poetic passion. Means he was not fit for public life, he realized after writing The Watchman. And philosophy and religion were where his subject matters of interest. So he wrote Religious Musings in the year 1796. In this work, he wrote about the unity and wholeness of the universe and the relationship between God and the created world. When we talk about the most influential event in his life, it was his friendship with William Wordsworth and his sister, Dorothy Wordsworth. This was between 1796 to 1810. And this friendship brought a joint publication with Wordsworth of the Lyrical Ballads. So the Lyrical Ballads is a collection of 23 poems. It was published in the year September 1798. Now you should remember that in a Satan net examination, they may ask you such questions. When was the Lyrical Ballads published? They may give the month and year then. So you should know the month as well. They may say March 1798, September 1798, like this. Okay. So the volume contained 19 of Wordsworth poems. Out of 19 poems were by Wordsworth and 4 by Coleridge. These were the 20th. Means the volume was dominated by the poetry by William Wordsworth. You should know this as well. How many poems were there? How many poems of William S.G. Coleridge were included in the first volume of the Lyrical Ballads? And out of these 4 poems, the most famous was the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Okay, so let's brief down their friendship in his own words. Coleridge described the division of labor. Division of labor means what? The distribution of work between the two poets. So I quote Wordsworth now. I quote Coleridge now. Wordsworth was to give the charm of novelty to things of every day by awakening the mind's attention from the lengthy lethargy of custom and directing it to the loveliness and the wonders of the world before us. While Coleridge's endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural, or at least romantic. I mentioned it briefly. Wordsworth dealt with nature, and Coleridge was supposed to deal with supernatural. Means in his poetry, we come across supernaturalism, means about fairies, about ghosts, etc. Okay, if you read his poem, Kubla Khan and all, you realize that. And the second enlarged edition of Coleridge's poems, the title, also appeared in the year 1798. And this contained lyrical and symbolic works, such as The Lime Tree Bower, My Prison, and Fears in Solitude. and his Kubla Khan is the most famous of his poems. And later, his Crystal Bell came into being. Okay, let's just briefly, as a critic, he's well known for these works. I shall brief it down. As a poet, we understood, and as a critic, when we talk about Wordsworth as a critic, means apart from being a poet, he is also a great critic. And he's well known for these works: The Friend, Table Talks, Letters, Aids to Reflections, Confessions of an Inquiring Spirit, Annual Photo, and Sibylline Leaves. But when we talk about the bulk of literary criticism, it is worthwhile to mention Biographia Literaria. Okay, Biographia Literaria is a very famous work, and apart from that, he has written lectures on Shakespeare and other poets. In these works, he talks about poet's mind and activity of the poet's mind, and the poem is merely one of the forms of expression, a verbal expression of that activity. And poetic activity is basically an activity of the imagination. We are going to understand all these things with reference to Biographia Literaria, where we'll understand two chapters from Biographia Literaria. So he's one of the greatest literary critics, and his greatness has been universally acknowledged and recognized. Okay, so he occupied the first place among English literary critics. That's what we need to understand. So with these words, I would like to conclude my discussion on the life and works of S.T. Coleridge.